Good evening. Thank you all very much for coming tonight. On behalf of the School of Medicine, I thank you for coming, but more personally, I thank you for coming as well. I want to begin by recognizing a distinguished guest that we have. I ask you to recognize him, Regent of the Board of Regents of the Nevada System of Higher Education, James Dean Leavitt. Regent Leavitt is also chair of the Health Sciences Committee and has led it very assertively through this very significant transition and change that we're going to be talking about tonight, and I thank him for his leadership in that regard. There are other distinguished guests that we're expecting, and when they walk in, I'll perhaps embarrass them, and you can applaud when they come in as well. So, I'm going to start where I started last year. 5 words, improving Nevada's health and healthcare. I know it looks like 6 words on the screen, but just picture healthcare as one word. In response to this goal, this aim, this purpose for the School of Medicine, I would say that the state of the school is strong, perhaps very strong, and I think getting stronger every day. The reason for that assessment is partly because of the many accomplishments, some of which I'm going to highlight tonight, that are due to all of you and your hard work and your commitment and your dedication to the school. But the other reason that I assess the school as very strong is because of what's happening with the state's investment in public medical education and the very momentous, often called historic, events that have taken place over the past year that have brought us to this point. I think these 5 words are more important than ever, more pertinent than ever, more specific to actually what's happening. So what I want to do tonight is to review a bit of the past year, the triumphs and the tragedies. I want to talk about the legislative and governor's support and decisions and the support from the Board of Regents that have brought us to this, again, very momentous and historic time. I want to talk about what that means specifically for the University of Nevada School of Medicine, what we are doing and where we need to go. I want to talk a bit about the strategic planning process that we're going to launch, and in fact have already launched. You've already participated in a part of it, and I want to show you a bit of the data from that early part of a strategic planning process that is really quite amazing. This is really a major event in the history of the school to be able to bring this process to bear on such an exciting time. That will lead to a discussion of some values that I think will guide us, and you know I've talked about this before in the past. And then finally, the 3 words that we used last year: accountability, transparency, and partnership, to kind of grade sort of how we did in that regard over the past year and how that will guide us in the future. You have a very impressive list of highlights. I hope you take it with you. I thank Susan Hill and her team for putting this together. This is a remarkable compilation of major events, awards, recognitions, grants, publications, service, community engagement, a host of amazing things that have happened, of which you are all responsible. And I just have to say that if you're not impressed with this and you're not proud of being part of this school, then I don't know what it will take, because I think this is a very impressive compilation. I'm going to highlight just a few things that you'll read as you look through this. Certainly starting with regential approval of our affiliation with Renown Health. I'm going to talk about that a bit later, but also the partnership with Mountain View Hospital that will lead to huge increases in the number of residency training slots in Southern Nevada. Our partnership with Aurora Diagnostics that has completely redefined and reimagined the Department of Pathology as a robust group of academic pathologists with teaching and clinical missions. The Department of Internal Medicine here that continues to grow and expand its medical subspecialty fellowships that are so precious in the state, of which we have so few. The Department of Family Medicine here that has launched the Winnemucca Rural Family Medicine Residency Program. First residents finished their first year and are now in Winnemucca. and embedded in that community and in that hospital and experiencing rural health care. The Department of Pediatrics, who did an extraordinary thing to take over the lead clinic in partnership with UMC and to transfer responsibility for this safety net service to the Department of Pediatrics and have the department become fully invested in that clinic as its clinical and academic home for both primary care and subspecialty care for children. You heard a bit, for those of you who were here earlier, about a group prenatal care project in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology that's been supported by the March of Dimes and CMS. We have new pharmacy services at the 1701 building, not to mention the move into that building itself, which has, I think, finally come together with appropriate air conditioning and other amenities that I think make for a much better work environment for everyone and a much better face to present to residency applicants and faculty candidates. Project Medical Education is our attempt to bring business and political and community leaders in to experience a day in the life of medical students. We've been through 2 cycles of that so far. The 3rd cycle is coming up. It's been extremely well received, highly subscribed, and oversubscribed, a tremendous interest by legislators and others to experience and to learn what goes on in the school. We've partnered with Renown Health to launch a physician assistant program, which is making great progress. Space has been secured, a director has been recruited. The materials will go forward soon for a site visit next year to start in 2017. We have secured support for several grants. The money comes from the Attorney General's office and has been used to support major grants in women's health care, both in the North and in the South. In particular, support for new women's health care at Opportunity Village through the Department of Family Medicine, some new programs in obstetrics and gynecology, as well as some new preventive services programs for women. In the basic sciences in the North, we completely renovated and re-equipped the proteomics lab, which is a critical infrastructure for basic science research. And that was funded by major donor Mick Hitchcock and named for him. We have new grants in obesity and diabetes, preterm labor, smooth muscle function, GI, physiology, some large and major grants that continue to support basic science research. We've had several major discoveries that have been publicized in male infertility, rapid Ebola testing, and some very exciting speech pathology research that's gotten a lot of attention. Dr. Baran was recognized nationally this year with the Parker Palmer Award, which is one of the most prestigious awards for leaders in graduate medical education. We went through an accreditation for our continuing medical education functions, and not only were accredited, but accredited with commendation, which is extremely unusual in the CME world, and Melissa O'Brien was responsible for that. We had Healthcare Heroes recognized a couple weeks ago, Dr. DeAlba, Dr. Berkeley, Dr. Brogan, Andrea Gregg from the Area Health Education Center, all representing the School of Medicine. Jim Kenyon, our Senior Associate Dean for Research, was selected as a foundation professor at University of Nevada, Reno, which is one of the most prestigious awards at UNR. Mike Mascali was recognized as the Distinguished Classified Employee of the Year. Mike also works in research. Melissa Piasecki was recognized as a Woman of Achievement by the Nevada Women's Fund. We launched our Department of Neurology in collaboration with Renown and recruited a new chair, Dr. Ivan Lopez. And in fact, I've had a major changeover in our department leadership with several new department chairs, all coming from within the ranks who have stepped up with great skills and great aspirations to lead their departments. So we have Dr. Netsky in psychiatry here, Dr. Marcus Erling in pathology in the north, Dr. Lopez I already mentioned, David O'Coin in microbiology and immunology, Dr. Files in surgery, Jeff Harper in biochemistry in the north, and Kathy Goring in internal medicine in Reno as well. So a whole new cadre of fabulous department leaders, all of whom are stepping up to take responsibility for their departments. We have major new leadership roles for Dr. Lisa Palmer, who's the new Senior Associate Dean for Clinical Affairs in the South and the head of the practice plan. and again, Dr. Piasecki in her new role as Executive Associate Dean. So, fabulous activities, fabulous accomplishments, major recognitions, major awards, and I hope that you feel the same pride that I do when I get to review these and describe them to you. And not everything was happy, and not everything was positive. So we lost two great leaders, and I just want to take a moment to comment on their great loss. Dr. Greg Perry on the left, Chair of Microbiology and Immunology, and of course Dr. Zamboni on the right. These were great leaders, extremely strong department chairs, but leaders beyond that in terms of how they contributed to the school as a whole, other leadership roles that they took, their own personal scholarly accomplishments, and in Dr. Zamboni's case, his clinical reputation, a huge loss to patients, to students, to residents, to the school, to the state as a whole. And I'll just say, personally, a great loss to me as well. So I want to make sure we always remember them. So I think it's fair to say that the past year has been extraordinarily intense. And I think it's also fair to say that this is not a blip, this is a trend. And coming years will be equally intense, if not more so. Let's talk a little bit about the legislature and the governor. So the Board of Regents has come together around a unified statewide vision for public medical education. That's good. That's even great. But what's even greater is that this got traction with the governor, got traction with the legislature, and funding, as you know, has come forward to support that. This, to me, is a break point, a line from which we will move forward. As you know, in past years, I have talked a bit about history for the time that I've been here, but history that precedes me, and what I believe to be tremendous difficulty in how the vision was constructed for public medical education. I think that's done, and I think that's the last you're going to hear from me about some of that history. For the first time in a long time, I think that's done and old and should go away. It's now all about the future. But I understand that it's very different here than it is in Reno in how this future might be perceived or received. And I guess my response to that is I think it depends completely on how you view this event. If it is viewed as a zero-sum, win-lose situation in which we're just kind of taking resources from one place and moving them to another place, or taking resources from here and moving them there, and we're just kind of rearranging relationships and rearranging collaborations, then I think we've all lost, in a sense. I think the only way this can be seen, because I think it is the way it should be seen, is part of a larger vision of a statewide healthcare vision. You're going to hear me say statewide about 20 times tonight. And I just want to hammer home how critical it is to think of this in bigger terms. Will there be rearrangements? Will there be dislocations? Will there be changes in people's relationships and appointments and roles and jobs? Yes, of course. And it's not just here. I know it seems more concentrated here, but this is taking place across the state. But that's the point. It is taking place across the state, and it is part of a much larger vision that I think we need to focus on. For UNSOM, it's critical that we talk about what we are, not what we are not. The picture is of the original medical school. This is a building on the UNR campus. I think it's the Mackey building now. It says medicine somewhere over the door if you look real closely. This is the history, and this is not what we are. And to talk about what we are not, I think, doesn't get us anywhere. I think we have to talk about what we are, where we're going. I don't think this is an issue of UNSOM versus UNLV, or even UNSOM and UNLV. It is UNSOM and University of Nevada, Reno, and UNLV together responding to what the state has done with regard to this funding and what the larger picture is that comes from that. This is a Nevada system of higher education, system of public medical education. Somewhat ironically, this is actually what the former chancellor, Jim Rogers, talked about when he talked about a health sciences system. And it has come to pass. And we will go forward to implement what this vision looks like. So you're going to hear me talk a lot about statewide faculty resources, statewide collaboration, statewide teaching programs, statewide research programs. If we think of this as just two schools that are just going to go about their business, then we have lost an enormous opportunity. So I'm going to constantly hammer this issue. Now, what it means for UNSOM is a major shift in how we think of ourselves being more concentrated and more fully located in Reno. One thing it means is that we are not defined anymore as simply the only medical school in the state. And we have to think about that. That's really, to some extent, what we have all thought about for most of the school's history. And we can do better than that. We can think more clearly about what are our special missions, what are our special resources, what makes us different than other medical schools, how are UNSOM and UNLV School of Medicine going to be complementary in their resources and in their missions. There are huge benefits to concentrating like this in Reno. And I know that may not be as interesting to you as it may be to the people in Reno, but I do believe it's important that to have that definition in a single community with basic sciences and clinical sciences together, and all that means for teaching collaborations and research collaborations is huge. So I will say that I understand how great a challenge this is for UNLV. And I have been in academic medicine for a long time and have a pretty good sense for what it means to launch a new medical school. And I have great respect for what it means for UNLV to go about this and for Dr. Atkinson to go about this. I would suggest that the same issue is true for UNSOM as well. And the same issues in terms of definition and branding and mission and values and vision has to be addressed by UNSOM and by those of us who have that responsibility. More specifically to Las Vegas is the selective commitments that I think UNSOM will have in Las Vegas, that I think offer enormous opportunities for all of you to continue to feel like you are part of this school as we go through this transition. And again, it's not so much what we're losing in Las Vegas, but a shift in emphasis and a shift in those selective commitments that can be very complementary to what UNLV is going to do. The expansion of GME at Mountain View is one of those. I think that's critical. I think it's very positive for everybody. It's positive for UNSOM students. It's positive for UNLV students. It's positive for Southern Nevada. I think it's positive for the state as a whole. The other issue, though, is the shift in medical student teaching emphasis. So as this transition has evolved, we're starting to be more clear about how we're going to be withdrawing, in a sense, from third-year teaching, clerkship teaching. Those resources, all of you, will be more devoted to UNLV over time for third-year clerkship teaching, but in favor of fourth-year electives and many ways by which UNSOM students can continue to have exposure to the great teaching that takes place here, as has always been true for UNSOM students. We turn out great students, and a lot of the reason for that is because of what they do here. And for them to not have access to that in the future would be a tragedy for the entire state. So if they don't have that in the third year, they have to have it in the fourth year. So we're going to be very encouraging, not requiring exactly, but very encouraging about UNSOM students having exposure to the great things that go on here. Now, in this kind of transition and this sort of reimagination of the school and rebirth of the school, the typical question that would be asked is, what do we want to be? And that's not what this says. The real question is, what do we need to be? And I'm responding a little bit, I think, to the book by David Brooks that came out a few months ago called The Road to Character. And one of the things he talks about in this book is the shift over time in commencement speeches that used to talk about service and engagement and contributions and what could students do to make the world a better place. And now they all talk about what do you want to be and what are your passions and how do you get what you want out of life. There's been a significant shift if you just analyze commencement speeches. And I think that's what we have to be careful of here. The state did not give us support to say, go off and be what you want to be. The state gave us support to become the school that we need to be to serve the state. And I think we have to keep that in mind very clearly. In fact, I think the entire system has to keep that in mind. This is not just a narcissistic exercise in what kind of school does UNSOM want to be and what kind of school does UNLV want to be. We have obligations to the state to serve and to respond to the funding that we have received. So we've undertaken a strategic planning process to figure out how do we best serve Nevada. And you've all participated in that. You've seen the survey that came out. I hope most of you responded to it. We have a few things that we get to look at here, just some very early data that I think would be helpful. So we sent this to over 2,500 people. And when we say UNSOM community, we're talking about friends, and alumni, and students, and residents, and community physicians, and of course all the faculty and staff, and practice plant, the whole show. 2,500 people is roughly what we think about when we think about who are we. 537 respondents, which is huge. For this kind of survey, that's fabulous. You guys did a great job. Carolyn Braco is a graduate student in psychology at the University of Nevada, Reno, and she's taken this on as a major research study. This is an incredibly rich database. So you've got the entire survey, but you have all the open-ended responses as well. What she did for starters was to make wordles, word maps. Take the responses and place them according to how frequently they're mentioned, what kinds of words are mentioned. So I got 4 of these for you, and then 1 at the end. And they focus on the 4 areas that we broke down. So diversity, clinical care and service, teaching, and research. So you're going to get to see these. These 4 missions are laid out like this. So I'm going to give you a moment for each of these because these are fascinating. And they're really, really worth looking at. And we're going to spend more time looking at these. So these words are of a size according to how often they were mentioned. So look at what you see. Diversity, obviously huge. That's the major part of what we were asking about. Words like culture, and compassion, and respect, and outreach, and mentions of lots of the learners, so medical students, residents. If you're closer, you can dig in and see some more interesting words as well. I'll just give you a moment to just kind of take that in. This, to me, is very rich because it's a sort of a semi-quantitative but qualitative way to start to think about how we see ourselves and how we could be the school that we need to be. So this is diversity. This is clinical care and service. And, not surprisingly, you see a whole different set of words and phrases. So you see words like clinical quality and excellence and best and safety and rural and outreach and other ways that people think about the clinical care that we deliver and who delivers it and to whom is it delivered. The third one is teaching. Not surprising that medical students and residents are huge and occupy the central part of the screen, but you see some other interesting things in there without looking too hard. You'll see clinical research, which I found fascinating, that people start to think about clinical research as part of the teaching program and the training program and how we can link research with teaching, which is very near and dear to my heart and something that we're going to talk more about in the future. And you see faculty and physicians and community and other things listed in there as well. And then the fourth one is research. Pretty obvious there. But you see clinical research and basic science research and translational research and medical students. And interestingly, if you look not too hard, you see UNR listed, which I liked a lot because it tells us that there are relationships outside the medical school that can support research. And I'm hoping that at some point we'll do this and we'll see UNLV listed there as well. I think research collaboration is one of the most obvious and most critical ways that this statewide vision can be implemented. Carolyn also pulled out some quotations. I'll just read you a couple things that you all said. Recruiting and retaining researchers and physician scientists who will have national and global impact was listed by one person as a major goal. Growth with emphasis on quality, not quantity, of students and residents. I think this also ties into an institutional culture of respect, compassion, and diversity. Another one, produce some of the best doctors in the country with compassion and humility. I thought that was a particularly poignant way to describe it. And finally, excellence as it relates to quality and safety are crucial to the success of our students. I think there is great opportunity to be more innovative in our approach to excellent clinical care. The question that I will pose somewhat rhetorically is how can you contribute? There are going to be enormous opportunities. There'll be task forces, committees, work groups, ways that you can be connected to this process as it goes forward over the next many months. This process is absolutely critical to giving us guidance as to where we become a different school of medicine and how we sort of reorganize ourselves. But it also leads into our LCME cycle. As some of you know, UNLV obviously going through its accreditation, that's its focus. And they have some very tight deadlines and they're working very hard to stay with those deadlines. We have our own cycle coming up. We're roughly 15 months off, but a fair bit of overlap. And so the strategic planning process is incredibly important. The LCME is going to be just as focused on what the impact of these changes are for UNSOM as they are focused on UNLV. And we better keep that in mind. This is not all about a new school. This is about two schools kind of reorganizing and restructuring, and we've got to do just as much on the UNSOM side as the UNLV side. So that process is going to tell us a little bit about what we need to be and what we're doing. The question is, how will we get there? And that's what takes us to values. So there are lots of ways to look at this. You can look at values, you can look at characteristics of successful organizations, you can look at various types of kind of common sense and wisdom and aphorisms. Here are some of the core values that always come up as being most critical to organizations and to their success. Commitment. Commitment to excellence and quality. Commitment to service. Commitment to each other. Those are going to be important. Service-based leadership, what do I mean by that? If you look at the leadership literature, this is a very powerful concept. It talks about leadership for the sake of others, leadership to serve others, leadership to serve other purposes, leadership to make others better. It's what we talk about with athletes sometimes. So sometimes you'll hear announcers, especially in basketball, talk about star athletes who are not only great themselves, but make everybody on the court better. And that's what service-based leadership is, which is not leadership for the sake of the leader, leadership for the sake of the people in the programs that the leader serves. Integrity is critical, and trust is critical. And trust is going to be a continuing focus. I think we have to learn to trust each other. We have to learn to trust our vision for where we're headed, to trust the system that it will come together around these purposes. Another way to look at this, characteristics of successful organizations. Successful organizations have very well-defined structures, very clearly defined structures as to how they're organized, how they're led, how decisions are made, how they function, how they get their work done. That structure then leads to very clear goals, and that's what the strategic planning process is all about. All of that requires communication, it requires teamwork. It also requires the willingness to take risk. And that's something that I think we're going to need to talk about in the coming months and years. UNSOM in particular has not been in a place where taking risks has been comfortable. Lots of stresses, lots of turmoil, economic, political issues. The higher education system in general over the years has had great pressures placed on it. Risk-taking is difficult in those circumstances. We have to be willing to do that now, I think. To understand risk, to understand how to manage risk, to understand when to take a bit of a leap. And a lot of that has to do with the transition that's taking place. And so this might be particularly pertinent to the Las Vegas campus because there is great uncertainty. I get that. And I can't totally make that go away. And to some extent, we all have to come together around this transition and be willing to kind of take a bit of a leap and put ourselves out there for the sake of making this go well. And there's some sort of other common sense kinds of things that get put out there. So we talk about, for example, the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. And that has to do with issues of individual career development versus organizational needs and trying to find the right balance where people get their needs met for their careers, but that also contributes to the good of the organization as a whole. We also talk about things like doing the right thing versus doing things right. So it's kind of the leadership versus the management issue. And again, this goes back to the strategic planning process and to coming together around what do we need to be for the state. I think there's a bias towards moving forward. I think there's a bias toward progress and pushing, and again, being willing to take risks and being willing to fail. So that's another part of taking risks. We're a pretty risk-averse place in general, and we need to be willing to take a bit of a leap, knowing that we may fail from time to time. And this one will be a stretch for all of you, I suspect, at the moment, because you're probably not very excited about some of what's happening and not real clear where it's headed and not real clear about what it means for your careers, what it means for your roles, and how this is all going to play out. I would suggest that even with that uncertainty, there is opportunity, and I think that there's great things that can be made of this, and I'm hoping that we can come together around that over time. So, the three words that I talked about last year that continue to guide us, this is to some extent a report card for me, in a sense. To what degree have we been successful in trying to implement some of these three concepts: accountability, transparency, and partnership? So this is a report card of sorts for me. Under accountability, I'd point to several things that have happened. We are working very hard, for example, on new guidelines for clinician educator track, physician faculty members, criteria for appointment, criteria for promotion, how there will be very clear expectations for progress through the faculty ranks in that track, and expectations for the department chair to come together around each faculty member's career, to have regular meetings, to have accountability for performance, accountability for progress. The faculty mentoring program, the people who were just here earlier this afternoon, just before most of you came in, is another example of accountability. So mentors had to commit substantial amounts of time to these faculty members to guide them and to help them with their research and education projects. The school committed to the awardees for this program some substantial support and expected productivity and expected success in return. So there was kind of a mutual accountability there. The professional development program in general is an exercise in accountability. It's ways that the institution invests in people, in return for which there is performance and productivity and growth and progress, in ways that faculty members contribute to the good of the organization. We're continue to work, probably not as fast as I would like, on productivity-based physician compensation plans. Different departments are at different points in this, and the departments are making some progress, but we got a ways to go in terms of really linking educational productivity, clinical productivity, academic productivity with physician income. And the final thing I'd say about accountability has to do with the LCME. We are going to enter a phase here of very intense scrutiny of our accreditation requirements as it pertains to LCME. And there's going to be a very high level of accountability as this process moves along, eventually to a site visit, probably in the fall of 2017. That's our cycle right now. We have a lot of things to show. Sufficiency of faculty, sufficiency of resources, sufficiency of the total clinical instruction system if we're going to actually truly move it, by and large, to Reno for the third year, student support space, various demonstrations by our hospital partners that they are contributing to student success. Elective opportunities are going to be a huge issue as we try to switch in terms of third-year teaching in Reno, but enhance our fourth-year exposure in Las Vegas. The teaching skills of residents, the teaching skills of all the community physician faculty members will be recruiting in Reno, and the overall issue of supervision for students. Whenever a school goes through a major changeover like this, there is a very high level of scrutiny. The second concept is transparency. I would say this is probably the most difficult of the three concepts. We talk about transparency a lot. It's really hard to achieve. And the reason is because there are issues of privacy, there are issues of policy, of regulations, of legal requirements. There are lots of reasons why it's difficult to be as transparent as we might like. I think sometimes when we talk about transparency, people take that to mean everybody gets to know everything all at the same time. And that's just not the way this works. But we're trying to figure out ways that we can be more open about some things. So we've done a few things, I would say. The Faculty Forward survey from 2 years ago, and kind of feeding the results back to you so that you can see what your fellow faculty members want and how the school has responded to that, I think is one example. The graduation questionnaire is a huge source of data. The exit questionnaire for graduating medical students tells us a lot about ourselves and how students see us. Some of it is good, and some of it is not so good. And we're going to feed that back to department chairs and clerkship coordinators and look at areas where we can improve, something we actually haven't done much of in the past. AAMC has a dashboard for medical schools. It's called a mission management tool, and it has a lot of data about the school and how we perform in a wide range of diversity and financial and other areas. And we've not fed that back so much, and we're going to do more of that as well. As the LCME process goes along, we will develop a website and start posting a lot of materials, and you'll see lots of reports and lots of data that we're compiling as part of the LCME process. The strategic planning process already has a website that's up. You'll get some notice about that. That'll start to be more widely publicized. You'll start to see some of the data that I just showed you as it comes forward. One thing that I'm pleased with is the way we've gone about a number of these chair searches. So as I said, we've reached into the faculty and identified outstanding internal candidates for many of these positions. But as you know, we've also expected those candidates to undergo a very thorough vetting process and to have a very intense set of interviews within the department, with other department chairs, with other leaders in the institution. I think that is a good way to go about this. And I think that that gives everyone a chance to be invested in the success of these new chairs as they come into their roles. We put Nevada Medicine Weekly up here just as a reminder that that's where we're trying to put a lot of the communication that we are going through. So let me talk about perhaps the most transparent issue, and that is the transition that we're going to undergo in Las Vegas. The town hall meetings that I held early in June, right after the legislative decisions, was sort of the beginning of that process, but certainly not the end. I think that it was a good start in that we got out on the table some things that we just hadn't been willing or able to talk about up till that point, and now we can talk about them, and I think that's a good thing. I'll just say personally that I'm still going through the stages of grief with regard to Las Vegas. When I came here, it was made very clear that my job was to try to pull the campuses together, to pull the state together, to solve this north-south situation, and I invested heavily in that. And my goal for all that time was to make Las Vegas in general, and to make the clinical departments in particular, successful as part of UNSUM. And now my job is to make Las Vegas and to make the clinical departments successful as part of UNLV. And that takes a little work on my part to kind of work through what that means exactly. So here's some things that we're talking about in terms of the transition. We have made the decision to move the clinician ceremony. When I first came, we moved it here because this is where it belonged. This is where the students were. They were going to UMC by and large. They needed orientation. It was part of a very obvious transition from the second year to the third year. It's inevitable that that needs to come back to Reno, as those students will eventually be transitioning to clerkships and to the hospitals in Reno. It's also part of a major curriculum change. So there's a reason why the clinician ceremony fits with what we're going to do with Block 11 and some of the transition course that takes place, and why it needs to be there. It clearly was going to come back in 2017, but we think it's best that it come back in 2016. We're going to work very hard to full blast, continue to support, develop, expand third-year teaching capabilities here. At the same time, we're expanding third-year teaching capabilities in Reno. That's why the legislative support is so critical, because we're basically running two entire sets of clinical teaching resources. But half the reason for doing that is so that UNLV has great teaching resources, and so that we can tap back into that for fourth-year electives down the road. We think that that shift should take place in July of 2017. That's our target date right now. So we think that Reno has to build out teaching capacity even before UNLV fully needs the teaching capacity here, and we'll figure out how to bridge that when the time comes. We think the same date may hold for GME transfers. So we've just set out a date of July of 17 as the date toward which we will work to shift the accreditation and the sponsorship of UMC residency programs. Dr. Baran will serve as the single DIO for both institutions, so that there will be as seamless a transition as possible from one to the other, and we'll work through many of the technical issues. The Las Vegas practice plan will have to go through some major transitions roughly on the same schedule, I think. UNLV has some outstanding consultants, PricewaterhouseCoopers, who have been here, will be here, will begin to deliver reports. I've met with them, as have others. I think they're really good, and I hope that they'll lay out some good structures for the practice plan, how it will connect to UNLV, and then how it will grow from there, because, as you know, Dr. Atkinson and UNLV have much different vision, a more expansive vision for a number of specialty departments and a much larger array of clinical departments than currently exist here, which I think is absolutely appropriate and absolutely critical. The other area I'll talk about with regard to transition is research. We have developed, under Dr. Langer's leadership, an outstanding clinical and translational research infrastructure and clinical research infrastructure for UNSUM. And wherever that program is headed with UNLV, we need to capitalize on that growth and capitalize on that to build clinical research capabilities in Reno, and hopefully keep the entire group together, because research collaboration, again, I will say it probably for the third or fourth time now, I think this is one of the most critical and to some extent underemphasized areas of potential for this statewide vision. We talk a lot about the practice plan, we talk a lot about medical student teaching, we talk a lot about what the schools are going to do. We need to talk more about research and the great potential that a statewide system would have. So the last of the three is partnership. It's probably easiest to talk about that because there's so much going on in that regard. So let me just give you a little tour of that. I will say unequivocally, and will continue to say unequivocally, we are completely 100% committed to our UMC relationships until the moment we're not, and until the moment that that transfer takes place. And I hope people believe that. There can be no gap. This has to be absolutely seamless to have full teaching capacity, clinical contract support, faculty support. Everything that goes on between UNSOM and UMC has to continue and then has to move in as smooth a fashion as possible, both for medical student teaching purposes as well as for GME purposes. Mountain View, our new partner, is off to, I think, a good start. They're taking the lead in recruiting program directors in several areas, recruiting faculty members, developing the materials. We are trying to be good partners, good academic consultants, and to help them with that. I will also say that we're going to develop some new teaching models here. I think there's a possibility for some interesting medical student teaching models here, more longitudinal teaching that might take place, and we're going to explore that. I won't say too much about Renown because I know it's of less interest to you here, but I will say that this is a defining relationship for the school. Everything that we're talking about here in terms of a statewide vision for UNSOM is completely dependent on Renown as the clinical platform, as the academic medical center base. That relationship defines our clinical system within which or upon which teaching and research take place. One of my jobs is to help people understand how incredibly important this is. And I think we still do not fully comprehend how transformative this relationship is and the many opportunities there are for collaborations in many different ways. This is an example of yet another partnership with Aurora Diagnostics and our pathology department, and I put it out there because I think it's a model for other relationships that can take place both for UNSOM and for UNLV. Public-private partnerships like this, if they're constructed properly and set up properly and done well in a legal and financial fashion, can be enormously helpful. This state is not set up in a way in which medical schools have complete control over their destiny. We do not have massive healthcare systems like some places do. We have to have these kinds of partnerships. And what this has done for the Department of Pathology is extraordinary. St. Mary's, again, another relationship in Reno for a possibility of a new family medicine residency. And there are other partnerships, so Northern Nevada Medical Center, Community Health Alliance. I want to particularly single out our relationships with the VA both in Reno and the VA here in Las Vegas. These are essential partnerships, and I know Dr. Atkinson and her team understand this completely. That's a major, major partnership for UNLV here, as it is for us in Reno. I'm pretty sure you have no idea what this is. This is the Office of Community Faculty, Office for Community Faculty. This is the office at Renown that will guide our entire outreach to the practicing physician community in Reno, and will recruit and support and train community physician faculty members as we build out our full clinical teaching capacity. The other thing that I'll comment on in that regard is has to do with the pipeline issues and medical school pipeline issues. I think that we have to think very hard between the two schools how to develop a much more robust pipeline of medical school applicants in this state. It's to everyone's advantage. And I think this is another area in this transition that has not received sufficient attention as we've been focused on other things, and we should spend more time thinking about that. We have some rural partnerships. This is the hospital in Elko. I already talked about the program in Winnemucca. And then, of course, Project ECHO, our telehealth program. All of this comes to bear on the issue of branding. And I'll just say from UNSOM's standpoint, again, our brand up till this point has been, we are the only school in the state. That's not much of a brand. We need to understand better how we are defined, who we serve, how we serve them, what we do, what's special, what's unique, how do we complement what goes on elsewhere in the state. And we're going to tackle that very aggressively with a major branding exercise over the coming year. We will recruit consultants to help us with that and expertise to help us with that. And I think this will help everybody understand who we are and where we're headed. So, back to these questions, and let me wrap up. I think there is a window of opportunity here. And I know that it may be a window of opportunity that you all wouldn't necessarily seek, that this is such a wrenching change in Las Vegas, and this isn't something you would necessarily want to have happen. I think that it is enormous opportunity, and I want people as best as possible to think of it in those terms. This is the first time in a really long time that public medical education in general has had this opportunity to define itself, to understand what it needs to be, to understand how the two schools will come together as part of a larger system, to understand our mission, to understand our vision, to understand our values, to understand our strengths, to understand our brands, to understand how UNSOM and UNLV will come together to do this. So I'll finish with a last Wordle or word map. So if you take all the responses from the strategic planning, not by mission, but take them in toto, here's what you see. So this would be kind of a global view that you all have of UNSOM as a strategic entity and where it is headed. And you see great things here. So obviously medical students just leaps out, research leaps out, clinical, quality, residents, community, faculty, physicians, excellence, culture, and Nevada pops in there as well. This is the kind of sort of global vision we start to have about ourselves. So I think there's an opportunity here. Again, I understand that you may not have sought this. This may be traumatic, this may be dislocating, this may be disruptive, but it's also change, and from change comes good things. And I think we have a chance to do something great here. I'm going to try personally as hard as possible to be positive, to be proactive about this, to be forward-looking, to try to go about this in as confident and as comfortable a way as possible to go back to the 5 words, improving Nevada's health and healthcare. I look forward to doing all of this with you. Thank you. Question? Please, Regent Levitt would like to comment. I think.
Okay, thank you so much. I really want to take the opportunity to explain some things from the Board of Regents' perspective. I also want to take this opportunity to compliment Dean Schwenk for a variety of reasons, and I'm going to articulate those to you right now. Jim Rogers became interim chancellor in early 2004. Dan Klaich became vice chancellor mid-2004, and I was elected to the board in late 2004. During my first 2 weeks on the board, I recognized that Jim saw a vision for what I will just say an academic medical center, for lack of a better word, in Las Vegas. At that time, I knew that we needed to give Jim's vision some parameters. Those parameters were the ad hoc Health Science Committee. I urged Chairman Stavros Anthony at the time to create that committee. Didn't succeed. I then urged Chairman Whipple 6 months later, who succeeded Chairman Anthony, to create the ad hoc Health Science Committee, and he created that committee. I was the inaugural chair of that committee, and it is that early history from 2006. I now want to jump forward to 2011, and we're now talking March or April of 2011. President Glick has just hired Dean Schwenk after a torturous search for the Dean of the School of Medicine. The first search failed. The second search succeeded. Right after the hire, President Glick passed away untimely. President Glick, who never forgot to say anything, forgot to mention to Dean Schwenk that his hire was dependent upon approval of the Board of Regents. Dean Schwenk comes out, visits with several of our Clark County commissioners, former Chancellor Rogers, and is told that if he's not going to live in Las Vegas, he might as well not even come out here. He still decided to come out here, but I think his house had closed in Michigan. Flash forward now, 2 years ago, 24 months ago, I made a decision that has impacted every single person's life in this room. And it started with an agenda item in Elko, Nevada that said, not UNLV School of Medicine, it said the expansion of public medical education in Nevada. And Regent DeBrava and I didn't dare think that if we labeled it UNLV, that it would have any chance of succeeding. And we honestly believed that if we were to start another medical school in this state, that both of the schools would have the best chance to absolutely flourish and prosper. That was the intent of the two people that wrote the agenda item. But if you think about this, that was 24 months ago. 24 months ago. Then the Lindsay report came out, the Tripp-Umbach report. The chamber got involved. The legislators got involved. UNLV got involved. But it's fascinating history, because I'm going to tell you one other thing. About 7 years ago, Jim Rogers asked the board to adopt a policy that said there will never be another professional school in Nevada for 20 years. How many know about that in this room? 3 people? Think about that. That was about 7 years ago. Now, why did he do that? He did that because Bill Raggio feared that Jim was going to steal the medical school from Reno and locate it in Las Vegas. But in exchange, he extracted greater support from the next legislative request from Bill Raggio. And neither of them are here now to alter my view of this story, but I do have the memo, and the board did in fact vote on this policy. But think about this, just 24 months ago. That idea was started, this expansion. The very next meeting, 3 months later in December, we had to convince the northern members of the board that we needed to repeal the policy. So they could say, well, we're not against a medical school, but we don't think we should change the policy for a professional school. Right? Clever. But I now want to compliment Dean Schwenk, because what he signed on for 5 years ago, no one signs on for their president passing away a few weeks after their hire. That relationship is integral. It is the closest relationship the two people have at a university. And through all of this time, his grace, his class, and his dignity, and even since we've been exploring this idea for 2 years, with the funding request being finalized this past June, he continues to do everything he can to build both the unsung presence here and now working closely with Dean Atkinson as we transition. The last thing I want to close with is I honestly believe this is an incredible opportunity. By having 2 schools, that means we've just doubled the number of chairs that we need. It means that we've just doubled the number of students that we need. It means that we're serving more patients. So double up everything, but I am absolutely convinced that the whole is going to be much greater than the sum of the 2 parts. I hope you look at this as an opportunity. We knew, Regent DeBrava and I knew, that we were creating risk, but we were creating opportunity. I will always choose opportunity over risk, and I couldn't be more grateful for Dean Schwenk's support and for all of you moving forward with the absolute best attitude that you can possibly have. And I look forward to celebrating the upheaval in your lives. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. I'm happy to take questions or chat a bit, but I think thanks a lot. Good to see you. Maureen, thank you.